Thank you, Elif Hanım, and also Çiğdem and Burcu. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for being here as well. And it's also very nice to hear because I wrote some part of my thesis right above at the desk. So it's very good that after a couple of months, it's now over and I'm here to talk about this now. This is actually the title of my dissertation as well. And today I will just go through just overall organization of the thesis with some specific cases and documents that I will show for each part. And also I will kind of introduce to you what do I mean by this architectures of anticipation and what do I want to go with this in terms of perhaps like conceptual introduction to architecture and its histories. So let's dive into it. So on May 26, 1935, the Istanbul Daily Cumhuriyet published the first of a series of striking illustrations by Ercüment, who is actually Ercüment Kalmık, who became a painter in the 60s, very famous one. And this is a scene depicting Istanbul under attack from the skies, planes swarming over Hagia Sophia and Sultanahmet Mosque, minarets cracked and crumbling, smoke coming out from pieces where incendiary bombs fell, and the shadowy figures hardly even seen on the streets. Down below, the caption war. A country suddenly attacked by enemy air fleets, burning and destroyed, its citizens torn apart and poisoned, and this is what air threat means. So this is actually right after İnönü gave a speech at the aviation conference, and he publicly acknowledged that Turkey is under the threat, the world situation is restless, and we need to take action. And then he actually just published and called for the campaign to raise money for the aviation community. And then these specific pictures, illustrations, accompanied by Abiden Daver's text, who never stopped writing about both the war and the situation and all the intricacies of who has the more power, aviation or naval power. And he published like maybe 3 different pieces in every day, and he's been like overly productive, and it's also like very worthy in his anticipations about the future. So he writes, I will just read it, the whole thing. Let us take our Istanbul, for example. 1,000-kilo aircraft bombs would turn Mimar Sinan's masterpiece Süleymaniye and the Byzantine Museum Hagia Sophia into ruins. Poison gas would kill people, animals, and trees. Within an hour, this city where joyful and happy people live would turn into a hell filled with the smell of blood and smoke and the cries of dying people. And after this stage, he continued to publish similar pieces. And he wrote, how will tomorrow's war begin? Not with an ultimatum, but with an air raid. Aerial fleets composed of 300 to 400 planes will launch a sudden midnight attack, burning, destroying, shattering, and poisoning. And this became a kind of a milestone in terms of Turkey getting prepared for the war as well. But it also became very public, actually, because right after the day when İnönü acknowledged and called people for help, he also went to the press conference and he announced that now the press needs to take on and he needs to first learn and also teach what the aerial threat means for Turkey. And then within a couple of weeks, the newspapers and journals, they all started to publish several illustrations, but there's also a kind of a spatial lexicon started to emerge in terms of what we see and what this will war be about. So we see some territories of the country here a lot of depictions of the borders. We see all these planes. If it is Turkish planes, they are defined as like this eagles of salvation. But if it's a enemy plane, it is like iron monsters and stuff like that. But also we start to see like everyday life depictions in terms of how the war will come and what will happen to people. And we see familiar places like the historical peninsula, like Beyazıt Square, and more. And there's another aspect that is everywhere. First, the crying and escaping women, and another one is the gas mask. And all these things is actually what introduced me to this problem that I came up with an aim to answer for my dissertation. And this is what the expectation of war, conditioned space, urbanism, and everyday life in Turkey during the late 30s and early 40s, and how can we approach the aerial threat as a spatial problem. And one thing that has been very helpful for me to really conceptualize all this was the idea of frontiers. And this is Lucien Febvre's definition, but it really resonates with many other languages because he traces in French and frontier as a front line of an army, the facade of a building, and the shifting boundaries of the territory. And what we know in Turkish, it is a forehead and the front. So it is both a moving part of a region. It is a kind of an expansion and a point from which one objects outward. And then it just faces something alien to itself. So a frontier delineates the boundary of one's existence, extending outward to encompass nations, military zones, territories, and even atmospheric boundaries as entities. And when we conceptualize this recognition of a future threat, we start to kind of think in terms of how we actually conceptualize this expectation. And anticipation came pretty handy for me. This is actually a definition as an emotion because many Western theories defines anticipation as one of the 8 primary emotions. They also define it as with surprise as its opposites. And the definition is very, very spatial. And it reads as the maintenance of physical, symbolic, and social environments where security is felt. The territory includes lands, homes, possessions, status, and familiar settings. Maintaining territory requires exploration, monitoring, foresight, planning, and control. And another quote that I really, really like within this context is that Heinz Forster's the cause lies in the future. So what I actually traced and try to bring it together is all about really, we define a future threat and we work against it. And I am looking at the spatial aspects of it. And with the frontiers idea, I can actually make it in 3 scales. One is the national territory where I deal with more like military aspects, more international relations, some of the push and forward with the borders and etc. And with the city, now the airspace is an interface that would create the contact with the enemy. So the cities are now target due to aviation. There's this whole talk about the tomorrow's war, and that will be a completely different kind of war because now the civilians are targets, the bombs will fly, and then the aviation will just create a completely different scenario for civilians and the cities. And the last part is the body. And I talked about mostly like aviation and bombs, but one of the things that we'll see a lot is also the scare of poison gas. And this is actually, it's banned internationally, but nobody is sure whether countries will follow it or not. There is a lot of writings on this. And of course, masks, gas masks, became more like a symbolic figure to show a lot of things, a lot of emotions, both some sort of a pride because we now produce it and we can have it, but it's also this alien figure. So human face is also a frontier that needs some more technologies that will be protected. So this is also the organization that I will follow for the remaining
Yes.
of the presentation. So the first part, I
Ha,
actually, oh, somebody is talking.
güzel. Hangi
Can you
programı kullanıyorsunuz?
mute
Movie Maker mi?
yourself? Hello. Ah, okay. um, So the first part is what I call national territory under pressure, because I basically look at this map, and what we see is literally just Turkey is surrounded by a lot of diplomatic forces. And right before the war, starting from like 35 or so, we see like several attempts to gain some sort of sovereignty. And the most important one is, of course, the Montreux Convention, that they gained the right to militarize the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, and 1939, the Hatay annexation, and also there are some regional pacts like Balkan Entente, and with Iran is Sadabad Pact. But when the war actually started, Turkey was really, really getting the pressure around. We see the Soviets is pressuring from northeast, and they actually, together with the UK, they invaded Iran and split it. And there is the Bulgarian and Nazi Act on the west, and also Athens and Greece is invaded, and there is the Italians in the 12 islands. So it's really, really surrounded on all sides, and in a way that what we've seen in the most like the international relations history is that Turkey is really kind of embraced this neutral stance, and some called it like Operation Foot Track because it was always like waiting and waiting and postponing, and some called it like it's actually a very unmanly stance, and they even like kind of talked about İnönü decastrating, like castrating the manliness of the Turkish nation and stuff like that. So, but what we know is that İnönü and Numan Nanemencioğlu, especially, they were really adamant diplomats, and there's a lot of diplomacy frontier that put work to. So, if we think about this in terms of this spatial aspects, and of course, we would expect to see some defense strategies, but it's not only defense. We see a lot of diplomatic agreements, especially after getting obvious and manifold aid from the UK. But the first one that I looked is the borders, the most voluminous construction part is the Çatalca Çakmak Hattı. And this is the defense line. It's like all these nations, like we know that there is a lot of like Maginot we know, and we have in Greece we have defense lines, and this one was actually planned in Edirne. Border with the Bulgaria, but then it's just kind of had a setback, and it's basically protecting Istanbul now. This is a very cryptic project because there's not much to be found, especially in archives in Turkey. But there are a couple of books, and one is a recent one. It just focuses on directly this, and it's based on a lot of in situ research. And another one is a master thesis, Hasan Cem. So if you're interested, these are the sources. But what we have here is just spanning over 50 kilometers. They are called like korugan. They are bunkers, and it's just a really ambitious project. Especially when we think about the scarcity of cement production in Turkey, and also in terms of labor conditions, it's been pretty awful. It was mostly like forced non-Muslim labor, and also soldiers whose leave is just postponed and postponed and postponed, and it actually led to the death of many. And another thing that when we see in terms of how we have this territorial definition is a lot of surveying and furnishing with lots of aircraft batteries, anti-aircraft batteries, some like observation places, some lightning, special lightning insertion. But we know that there is a lot of planning, especially in the Bosphorus. The crossing of Bosphorus in times of need has become a really huge problem. And then there is one military exercise. It takes like 1 year to prepare for this. They borrow ships from the city, and they build new piers, and it's all about really just how to handle the Bosphorus and how to establish this maritime um, formation. And in terms of sea frontiers, there's a lot of examples like tiny projects as well, especially through the aid from the British. But one of them is very intriguing, especially. It is both the development of Mersin port, but also there is one really great document that I really, really like. It is a report of Vecihi Akın, and he's been, by the time, he's been a translator to one of the generals, British generals. And they actually like traveled all around Mersin to decide where to put what in terms of military equipment. And he writes this really good report, both defining the land itself, because now they look at it in a completely different lens, that the enemy is coming from the sea, and so which part are safe, which part are not. There is this aspect, and where to put the depots, and etc. So in terms of spatial perspective, they have a completely different spatial program in terms of that. And he also draws this sketches to assign where did they put what. And this is all happening also while Turkey is claiming that it's neutral, and that its sovereignty is all ahead. And I actually wanted to show this one video because Mersin was also the site for. Oh, I will share it. Yeah. This is a video because, but not this one. It's not that one, this one. Um, This is a prisoner exchange that took place in Mersin, and Turks were just so proud that they, negotiated this deal. And it speaks in English. It shows, but this is Izmir. Hmm. Oh no, this is Izmir prisoner exchange. Okay, there's been a mistake. So let's skip it. I will show you afterwards. Um,
By the way, are those the videos that are somehow prepared as newsreels for
yeah, I
this
think
month?
so.
Yeah.
I think so, definitely. Uh, but this one for Mersin is actually, yes. It shows the prisoner exchange and how Turkey helped as a neutral nation. It's out of war, and Mersin has this new diplomatic role in the south. So after the land borders and the sea body borders, there is, of course, the like a lot of operation going on in terms of creating this airspace. And one case is pretty interesting. It's the British chose Izmir as a base, and all these parts that are marked, it's actually the parts that they want to have, especially to build air bases. Some of them are just simple air grounds to take off the plane and all. But there's been like this negotiation going on with the Turkish side that which parts they are willing to give up and operate, and which clothing they should wear to, not be suspicious and not danger the Turkish sovereignty and stuff like that. But this Izmir especially considered and asked for to help the Greece. But this airspace is not the only thing. Because all these military operations, it is for the airspace, but they built on the ground. And then there is a lot of equipment that they want to put in depots as well. And this is one map. It's issued by it's filled by the British forces, and these are all the places they ask from the Turkish government to assign them for their depot purposes. And among them, there is Ahmet Bey Tobacco Depot, and there is like from Kereste factory, another tobacco depot, Italian school, and there is like 1922 different places. And they even ask for the buildings in Kültür Park, and then the Turks were like, oh, that's enough, I think, and then let's not go that far. So all these pressures and examples that we see that it just generates this kind of transformations or new kind of activity to prepare for the war, or just kind of we see the manipulation of that. They create a lot of mobility in terms of both people and also goods. And I will show you a couple instances that we see how this political and militarist push actually creates this kind of movement inside. And this map is actually shows the camps of the refugees and their numbers. In each camp in 1942, there is one in Ankara, Niğde, Isparta, and a couple more places. And we see here, it's not very good, the resolution, but we see like in between 50 to 100 and so forth. But when we come here in Izmir, we see 3,478 people. And we actually know that there's been a lot of refugees coming from the Greek islands, after the occupation. And there's actually a really nice oral history documentary. It's called Asia Minor again. You can actually watch it. So there is a lot of movement with people, and when Turkey actually announced that it's going to be now Örfi İdare in Istanbul and the Thrace region. They also encourage people to move out from this region to Anatolia, and they encouraged specifically old women, widows, people who doesn't work, and women in general. And of course, there were like incentives for them to leave in terms of like tickets and carriage and etc. And there are these accounts because a lot of people registered for it, and then it just creates this whole anxiety that is Turkey really going into war. And then to kind of calm down all this noise is that in this newspaper we see that the trip was so cheerful and everybody was so happy, and then they just talk to people and they say, oh yeah, we are so happy that we are leaving and we will see our relatives and stuff. But then you see a little bit like between the lines, if like 50,000 people registered, they say, but then we see that the boats were actually half empty. So I'm not sure how much this migration worked. And then after some point, especially after Turkey made an agreement, like this friendship agreement with Germany, people get back to their cities. And one example is also from Istanbul Archaeology Museum. Like in 1939, the war starts, it's on the news. And then the same week, Istanbul Archaeology Museum shuts down and shuts down for visitors. And then we know that there are like reports on that. They send the small findings to Anatolia, into Niğde, for example, and they also build this protective temporary structures. This is from wood, but there's also like sandbags. Then they just cover completely for the immovable artifacts. So not only the people and the goods, but the information is actually, especially spatial information, was in move. And this is, for example, there's a lot of mapping going on, and I think it's really just the need to know where things are, basically. And like the newspapers, like here, they start publishing maps of the world, like part and part, and there's a lot of sketches and maps going on in terms of how the war proceeds. And this one is a sketch found on Italian prisoners captured by the British in Libya, showing Turkey's industrial facilities. So it's really just this information is so valuable, this spatial information, that it becomes a kind of currency. And eventually, when we think about all the borders of Turkey and the outside political and military contacts, Turkey is very happy on paper that they have not been involved in the war, and this ışıklarını söndürmeyen yegane memleket. We really see this trope a lot, like coming on and on and on. It's both, I think it's like pride, and also it's a kind of consolation that because we know that a lot of things in terms of economic conditions and so forth, it's really hard. So the second part is the city. And when I say it is wartime, actually, maybe I didn't talk about it. I think about like, it's not the war that is actually happening, but how we really imagine the city when the war comes and all these preparations behind that. So we see several kinds of epistemic production in terms of how do we really have this A-raid proof or A-raid resistant city. And there's kind of some people from architecture and urbanism are interested in, but there are two main books from Britain. They are like giant books, like 1,000 pages. They are both architects and also military members. And they just go over all these aspects of what happens when a building hits and how it really is destroyed, all these kinds of effects. But when we look at this ideal A-rate proof city, we actually see a very similar scheme to Garden City. So it's kind of like built on top of this. So what we want is that it's with one center, but visibly divided. And this is also important for incendiary bombs because there will be fire. And if there are breaks, it will not really just spread a lot. And also we have more like a futuristic ideals that is this shape is more like a Winkel shelter, and it kind of resembles that. But the whole talk about what is a raid resistant city, and actually like in architecture, somebody wrote, the best city is actually a village that is close to the city. So there is a lot of talk in terms of both like the body of the city and how it should be, because it's like right after modernism as well. But we also see very similar examples and discussions, not necessarily talked in terms of A-rate proof city, but again, it's because that it follows up on this Garden City movement. For example, this last one is from Burhan Arif, and he is just talking about in 1932 as a scheme of an ideal city, and they are very, very similar. So this defining a raid resistant city is actually not only done by architects and professionals, but also by law. And in Turkey, we have, I think almost like, I didn't number them, but more than like 15, almost 20 different kinds of like regulations. Some of them are laws, some of them are temporary. But what really interested me is that there are laws that really defined, for example, here, yapılarda pasif korunma, regulation on the passive protection conditions to be applied in the preparation of urban plans and determination of important building sites. And another one is literally just describes how the city should be in terms of buildings and shelters. And there are also specific like regulations, for example, like the principles for the passive protection of factories and establishments, and they really just give us a picture. Now, this kind of information they carry is very formal, and sometimes it's very distinct from what the reality is, so that they will be kind of employed on them. But what we have on the like more public communication side of passive defense is a lot more diverse and colorful. These are some of the booklets, journals, course books on poison gas and aerial protection. There are several people who are chemistry teachers. There are people that were like army members. Also, there are chemists, there are some doctors, and they are giving advice on how to build a shelter. There are a lot of different types. There are like 10 pages of them. There are like 200 pages of them. There is a lot of like mobility in terms of translating the materials from French, German, and English sources. For example, this too, it's Pasif Korunma in Turkish. It was like a little booklet from illustration journal, and Turkey just they translated it and published it.
Yes, there are some periodicals even.
Yeah, there are. For example, this Zehirli Gazlar Mecmuası and Can Kurtaran. They are not very much lived because they like one issue, two issues, and some, they are actually like Geniet, and then they publish their own journals. And but in every journal after 35, we see time to time this kinds of information published on the topic. But this communication with the public is not only on the print. There are kind of implementations. Sorry. There are implementations of how to build these trenches. So they're building on the city squares so that you can just go and inspect and build it the same way in your house. There are definitions of what would a bomb do, what kind of impact. There are a lot of depictions on that. And there are also, this is a very original kind of event for these people, because right before there's going to be kind of public exercise, a drill for aerial threat, a couple days before the government, like municipality, they leave these bombs on the squares so that it just creates kind of expectation and anticipation that there's going to be a drill soon. So there is actually also one more video that, because we know that especially in Istanbul, there was one public drill in 1939 that was filmed, and it's also shown in, yes, this one. It's also shown in the movie theaters as well. And this is, and let's watch a little bit.
1939 yılında İstanbul'da yapılan pasif koruma tatbikatından bazı sahneler. Aradan 10 sene geçmiş olmasına rağmen maske altında nasıl iş görüldüğü, gazlanmış yerlerin nasıl keşfedildiği.
And this is also very interesting because they recorded in 1939, but when Turkey was about to go into like join the war, they started to recycle it and show it again on the cinemas. So this happens, and then people are running around, and then they have to go to the shelters, and we actually see that they are actually just going through some basements and everything is shut down, and it's around Taksim.
Yangının maske altında itfaiye tarafından nasıl söndürüldüğünü göreceksiniz.
Let's go to that. Wow, it's 7:50 and I am so late, so I will just make it quicker. Just close this. Let's go back. Um, yeah, so the public communication of passive defense is also done through moving images as well. And in the thesis, I specifically looked at Istanbul because Istanbul is on the verge of just waiting years and years for a new city plan. Finally, it's done by pros. But also, Istanbul has already so much problems that all this aerial threat is just juxtaposed with the existing ones. And another reason for that, because of the emergency law that is that was issued in Istanbul and also the Thrace region, we knew that there's a lot of talk that if especially the Nazis, if they come, they will come through the Thrace region. So Istanbul needs to deal with these problems on top of its old problems. And there are a couple of experimental issues and some unexpected results in terms of implementation of the passive defense laws. So the first one, just briefly, I'm going to mention, is that they start to discover, it's actually one journalist starts to write about it, that if we cannot build modern shelters, maybe we can use Byzantine cisterns. So he just goes on to write about them. He visits one each day. And then he is like, these places are really dumb, but we can actually make them work. And then also there is one guy, he comes up to municipality, I think, and he says that he's been working for the Yıldız Palace, and he knows that there are some Ottoman tunnels that they can use. So he's just willing to show them. And so this kind of rediscovery of the underground in terms of survival is pretty important, because we now know that with the expectation of war, we look at the existing built environment in a completely different lens. One thing that troubled Istanbul a lot was the wooden houses, of course. Without the war, there's already lots of fires and destruction. But this has been spoken a lot. What is going to happen when the incendiary bombs comes? And there are a lot of speculation on that as well, especially on top of the new plan coming. And there are rumors that like the central government, they're gonna demolish all of them and stuff like that. But of course, it does not happen. And another implementation of this passive defense and the shelter regulation is that the new apartments, they are built with a shelter, but it's just one room basically. And within a couple of days, they start to rent out them as just housing or stores. So there's been like inspections on that, and people are fined because of this. So there is actually a huge spectrum in terms of this. If one hand, there is the modern shelters, and the other one is basically just digging the ground. And we also have a lot of drawings from very professional ones to like this one. It's just writes çukur, and they start to make them to join the regulations so that they will have a place to hide. And people actually, for example, in architect, the professionals, they are encouraging people to do that. And it's like it will be too expensive if you do that, because the regulations suggest like 10%, but never mind that, just dig a hole in your garden. And there is one drawing from Altan Öymen's memoir, and he also just goes on and tells about how they built this shelter trench in their home garden. And then he also says that when the law comes up like some men, they just started to go around the neighborhood saying that, yeah, we can dig your pit and trench. So he says that his father paid some guy and they just, dig the trench. And then a couple of days later, it just became a playground for them. Um, so the city eventually started to use the war and its equipment to create a kind of criticism on the existing situation. And in Istanbul, these caricatures, like this one, is asking, because they are wearing some masks, and he's asking, are you going to Habeshistan? And he's like, no, we're going to our relatives in Kasımpaşa. But it's because like it's so dusty and it's so smelly that they need to wear these masks. And there are a lot of jokes also about digging the trenches, and this foreign visitor, a tourist, sees the construction going on and he says, oh, you look great in terms of like preparing for the war. And he says, it's just roadworks. And this one is, I think this is like the reality check for all the laws and stuff. This guy is living in a cave-like place. And then he says, you need to build a shelter for your house. And then he says, we don't need that because he's already in living like cave-like conditions. And then, like expecting him to build a kind of modern shelter when he doesn't even have a normal housing is kind of absurd, and the jaw cleanse. So the last part is the body and the face, our bodies as frontiers, especially against poison gas. But there's also a lot of discussion in terms of what this ideal citizen should act, because it's defined by laws, it's defined by all these booklets and stuff. So what do they do actually? I already talked about a little bit about drills and stuff. So one thing that we start to see is this, what's called like air-mindedness, that the aviation is going to save us in a way, and it's like implementations. And it really enters the planning and urbanism field because they start to do pictures and then maps of the cities. But there's also leisurely activities of aviation. When all this talk about how we need more planes for war, but you can also go for a little sightseeing flights. And this is one from Istanbul to Ankara. But there's this one, it's in Yeşilköy aviation site, that you can go for just 15 minutes sightseeing flight and see around and come back. And the article just says how women love it, and it's always filled with women on the weekends and stuff. And of course, like in this, the most, like one of the most aspirational bodies, because aviation and aviators are like celebrities for the time, and Turkey is really just trying to produce their own in a way. And Sabiha Gökçen, of course, is here. Türk Kuşu is just training young people as well. And there's also Yüksel, and he is just this aviator, and then he wants to, he's just really proud to be part of that. So when the bodies are most useful and when they are most in need of protection, there are a lot of drills and exercises and blackouts, and we see in the official pictures very well-behaved people. But there is one thing that I really, really like this one. It's one of the first drills, and when the planes come, the sirens go off, and they expect people to run away, but they just gather in Taksim Square And then they just watch the planes, and then they just talk to among themselves that it's been only like half an hour. I wish it was more, you know. It's like it's too bad that it's over and then it's gonna happen again. And then some of the people are fined for this, I think, but then after the war they are like excused of their fines. So blackouts again, they also create such minor problems, like at night. If a dentist is going to visit a patient, should he turn the lights on or not? Because like the doctors have the rights, but what is the dentist gonna do and stuff like that? And it's just this very minor, very everyday stuff. And it also, this whole passive defense idea creates its own market and also material culture that we see there, selling doors and specific bulbs and stuff like that. So the last case, I talked too much. I didn't plan to. This is the Kızılay Gaz Maskesi Fabrikası. Kızılay Red Crescent Gas Mask Factory, and it was opened in 1935 in Mamak, and it was then transferred to Red Crescent, so they actually produce the masks and they own it, they sell it, they kind of give way. But what is very interesting here is that this factory and its journal, it really started to act like a research and development center. We see here the factory workers. There's also this Kızılay Halk Maskesi, and they are trying to sell as much, but they are also forcing people, especially state workers, to buy that, and they are actually just they are just cutting from their salaries to give them this mask. But this research part is, as I said, is very interesting, especially two people. One is kimyager, İzzet Erksal, and the other one is, he's a doctor, is Nuri Refet Korur. And they are both are like officials in this gas mask factory. And they write so much on this issue, both in the journals and also as booklets. They do their own research, they do their own translations, and eventually it's a little bit late. It's in the 1940, like 6 years after that, but they also produce one like more like a helmet for children to wear, and the other one is for babies. It's called Gazdan Korunma Kundağı. And they're, of course, they're just praising like the mother should take care of the kid, but first herself, and they give all the description. And they're also sold around. This gas mask is really just a comical element, and I checked a lot of issues of the Akbaba. They're super sexist, and they never lose a chance to insult a woman. And of course, like gas mask is just one thing that they can do it. One is just telling the other, the old woman, now she cannot talk about how beautiful she was. And the other one says she doesn't really need the gas mask because her face is doing the job. So this is the final thing that I will show. Again, my favorite thing, because this is one of a kind. It's called Kızılay Sığınağı. Kızılay builds a shelter, just one, and it was built in Kızılay. It's in their old building. In the garden of their old building in the square, and this is just kind of an adaptation of the Winkel shelters. They kind of tried to make the architect who drew the plans and everything, and kind of made this new ways to fit in, and he made it smaller. and he also tried to make it cheaper and stuff like that. His name is Fuat Saylan. And again, like Kızılay and some of the people paid for it. And it is just structurally, it's not very impressive, but it's like a half-meter thick reinforced concrete. And it is very compact. It's not to accommodate a lot of people. And they really wish that it will be like a sample that can be built around. But other than this, there is one modern shelter in Istanbul. There was for the health ministry, and of course in Ankara next to the second parliamentary building. So overall, what I came to see through these examples and studying the wartime architecture and urbanism in Turkey is that I started to detect some concepts that we see that these operations are very territorial, and they just work in terms of like defining and assigning danger to a space, then take action. They are very mobilizing, organizational as opposed to constructural, because it's all about like trying new ways to make things work. And they are instrumental because it gives the right authority to change legislation, even take people's lands. They are provisional because they are for short terms and they are mostly reversible, and they have pretty much very epistemic nature. They produce new knowledge, and they're very performative and effective. And for the war years, it was the anticipation of the war for Turkey, because even the war started elsewhere. Turkey entered the war at the very end in February 1945. So this kind of expectation never actually left. But right around the end, we have a new kind of anticipation for a new kind of condition that is the what's going to happen after the war, the tomorrow's world. And now we think about that. But what I want to stress, especially for this concept and how I use it and how it can be reusable in a way, that I see it as we have a future problem and then we start working against it today. And it's very similar what we see today, especially in crisis management, all this anticipatory governance, and like all this both natural and man-made crisis. And this scheme and all the laws, I think it could be a good ground for Turkey to expand on that, because at the same time, they're feared for the destruction by the enemy, but Turkey has seen a lot of earthquakes and destruction as well, but nobody actually just bring both together. And this is the final slide. This is again, like I say this for everything, this is my favorite. These are some serio comics by Cemal Nadir, and I think they really show what the Turkey is proud of and how do they really see themselves. And this is just very green land, but very protective of itself. There are two locks here on the Bosphorus, and then everywhere else is just living in hell, but Turkey is just very happy and peaceful with his white doll. But of course, it wasn't like that. Turkey saw, as I said, a lot of earthquakes and crises, also the devastating like varlık vergisi, the wealth tax. But eventually, all the things that I showed you today has been a kind of a new questions and answers if we think about in terms of architectural history of Turkey in this part as well. So thank you so much.